This is your host, Steven Sargeant of the Around the Coin podcast. Today we talk to Mauricio Di Bartolomeo from Ledn. He's the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Ledn Inc. We talk about his early days mining Bitcoin in Venezuela and the real deal behind the Petro token released by the government. We discuss how Bitcoin can solve for hyperinflation and the international use cases for providing financial aid to places like the Ukraine and the Middle East. We talk about Ledn's new and exciting digital asset backed products and services and the new launches that they're coming with in 2024. And we talk a little bit about how they survived the lending crisis we saw in crypto in 2022 and how regulation is impacting how crypto backed assets are used throughout North America and around the world. Stay tuned for this amazing episode with Mauricio. Welcome back to Around the Coin with your host, Steven Sargeant. We have Mauricio Di Bartolomeo. I'm going to try that again. I'm not even going to be able to pronounce your last name properly. Mauricio from Ledn. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Ledn.
Yes, happy to. And thanks for having us. My name is Mauricio. As you mentioned, I say this because it's relevant to Bitcoin. I'm originally from Venezuela. That's where I was born and raised and got my inflation education. And that's where I found Bitcoin, or where my family found Bitcoin. And that made a big impact on me because at the time my family finds Bitcoin, Venezuela was sinking into authoritarianism and hyperinflation, and everybody was leaving. And to me, it made a really, really lasting impression when my youngest brother starts mining and he started growing his mine and building his business at a time when everyone around him was leaving. And to see the expressions in people's faces and how their lives changed when they started mining and when they started being able to buy Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin, because at the time it was illegal to buy dollars in Venezuela to protect your savings from inflation. It was illegal to turn your bolivares into either dollars or tires for bartering or, buying tuna cans, anything that wasn't a bolivar, because the bolivar would basically melt. And they made any type of transaction where you were exchanging bolivares for something that would be able to retain its wealth, they made those things illegal. And so they were forcing people into poverty, and you could see it in people's faces. And they were searching for protection, turning every stone to find a place to hide. And when they found Bitcoin, you could see their expression, their demeanor, everything changed. And them being able to sustain themselves and earn this thing that where you were no longer running to get rid of. You actually wanted to keep it and keep it for as long as you could, and even more of it. It was a complete shift in how you experience day-to-day life in Venezuela, because the second you got paid, you needed to go get rid of it. But this was the thing where you got paid and you didn't want to get rid of it. You wanted more of it. It instigated savings.
How much of the population were driven to Bitcoin? Like, even that during that time, Bitcoin probably seemed maybe like a scam, fake money, especially when you're trying to retain your wealth. Was this a huge community that you felt you and your brother had at the time? Or was it still a small sector, similar to how, people ran into Bitcoin or went down the rabbit hole here in North America?
So when we started, like 2015, it was super niche. Like nobody was doing this. It was very difficult to find anybody to talk about mining with, or to even show you where they had bought the machines from or how they had installed it. There was nothing. We were among the first ones. I think we were the second or third in our city to bring in computers and install them. So at the beginning, it was very, very niche. But what I remember distinctly is that it spread like wildfire. In a matter of months, it went from nobody knows what this thing is to everybody with an open plug in their homes is looking to put a rig in there. And this sort of explosion and how consistently people got excited and found opportunity. For me, it was my aha moment was when my youngest brother was able to sell Bitcoin for bolivares at the correct bolivar to dollar rate, not the one the government said that was fake. You could only get those dollars if you transacted with them, if you were their friends and family, and that dollar wasn't available for anybody. For him to have taken a good that was, say, let's just say $10 worth of Bitcoin at the time. In Venezuela, to make this abundantly clear, the government says that you can buy a dollar for 10 bolivares, okay, at an outrageously low rate, right? Why do they do this? Because all of their official numbers are marked in bolivares. So when they publish their minimum wage to the United Nations, when you have 1,000 divided by 10, oh my goodness, what a wonderful country you are. But if you try to actually go buy a dollar in the open market, people will sell it to you for 500 bolivares. From 10 to 500 is a huge delta, right? And then when you try to divide your 1,000 bolivar minimum wage over 500, it's $2. You are the most impoverished country in the world. So they, for very selfish reasons, they set this at artificially low rates. But if you as a citizen want to go buy a dollar for 10 bolivares, nobody will sell it to you. What my brother did at the time, just so that everyone's clear, is he took $10 worth of Bitcoin and was able to sell them for 5,000 bolivares. Not for the 50 that the government said, for the actual exchange rate that you would get for a dollar in the open market. When he did that transaction, that was my aha moment, because there was no other good in the country that you could do that with. Half a decade, like for 3 to 4 years, and during inflation, everybody was searching for that answer. I saw it with my own two eyes in that room, and that conviction stays with me until today. My conviction on Bitcoin is unshakable because I've seen it do what it did in the darkest times, in the darkest countries. The way Bitcoin wins is not necessarily by getting us an ETF approved. The way Bitcoin wins is by giving the option to opt out of our authoritarianism and horrible monetary policy to billions of people. And it is doing that very well.
And what were the rigs like? I'm trying to picture, I'm a visual person. I'm trying to picture this. What were the rigs like? I think in 2015, you might have been able to get away with some kind of card for the computer, but I think you would have had mining rigs. And then if it is mining rigs, you couldn't even trade money or bolivars for tires. How are you getting rigs into the country? What was that process like?
Yes. So at the time there were S5s and the new S7s. S7s were, I think, just coming out of the oven. And a lot of people were doing Ethereum GPU rigs. Okay. Because Ethereum GPU rigs are easier to put together. You know, they didn't have to come from the particular factory. They were fast. You could put them together in a faster time frame, and they were much quieter and they emit a lot less heat. So for home mining, rigs are actually better than, or were back when Ethereum was in proof of work. No longer the case. Though those were the rigs, that was the equipment at the time. The way people would bring them in was Bitmain. So you would basically send it over to Bitmain. Bitmain would send it to you in a container. And not in a container, you buy a piece of the container, right? And so they would ship it to you, and it would take about 9 months to arrive. The interesting thing is that importing the products was not that difficult. You would just have to pay Bitmain, and you would put in your shipping address. And in fact, I believe Bitmain would ship via DHL. That was not an issue on that front because nothing was illegal. Everything was legal. So it would come through customs, you would pay whatever taxes you would pay, and you would install the machines after they would arrive. Because of the long delays in the Bitcoin equipment, a lot of people went to mine Ethereum and other GPU-based assets. And for this, they would build card rigs, so, you know, the standard 8 card or 6 card rigs that you see. Actually, I would say Ethereum was probably 50-50 in terms of the equipment people used.
That makes sense. And I think at that time, you know, a lot of the manufacturers, I'm not saying Bitmain specifically, but a lot of manufacturers were running the cards, or like they were running the machine, mining their own Bitcoin before they were sending it to the customers. So I think that had a lot to do with the delays as well. But what was the electricity bills like? Like, I'm really trying to picture an impoverished country. How are you affording electricity bills? Was electricity cheap? Like, how are you maintaining these rigs?
So the key thing with Venezuela was that these type of populist governments, they instill or institute all sorts of wonky subsidies. It can distort, you know, economic reality in many ways. So in Venezuela, to put it in context, electricity was heavily subsidized. It still is today. But back at the time, you could pay for the hydropower of a 4-bedroom house would cost you probably $2 a month. So it was effectively free. You know, the power was effectively free. And the internet was also pretty heavily subsidized.
What happened to the people that did go to BIC? Like, what happened? Was there any other alternatives? Like, what were people doing with this, you know, the hyperinflation, you know, their dollars, pennies on the dollars, if they had to kind of transfer it or trade it for any other currencies around the world? What was other people's options, or was Bitcoin really the only savior at the time?
People were leaving. Like Venezuela has the largest migration crisis in continental America's history. Venezuela has had 7 million people leave since 2015, actually. It's a country of 30 million people, to put it in context. For 7 million to have left out of 30 is a massive number.
Yeah, that's
almost 33% of the country left. Out of my 10 best friends from high school, 7 of us are out.
Right.
You know, 3 are left. And so the option was to liquidate your life work.
Where were people going to? Was there a certain place that people really loved going to that was the majority of the population, like a neighboring country, or people were trying to like get to North America or other places maybe in Europe or Asia? Where were people migrating to the most?
The two biggest destinations were Miami and Madrid. Those are the two biggest destinations. Miami, because it's the sort of capital of Latin America. Everybody in Venezuela at some point in their lives dreams of living in Florida or the US. And so that was a big destination. But for that, you needed a visa and a lot of money. And so that was not available for everybody. One thing is one thing to go. It's a
Yeah.
very different thing to be able to go, because once your country gets a bit of a name for people wanting to leave, visa restrictions increase. It becomes harder for you to go into different places. And I lived through that. So at the beginning, people were like trying to pick, right? Because immigration, brain drain happens in an interesting way, right? Like brain drain starts from the top to the bottom. The first people to see the issue coming are usually very smart, very prepared, very wealthy. They have visas, so they leave by plane. It's a very prepared migration. They have a job when they land. It's a planned transition, right? Then you start getting closer to the line where things start, and then at this point, people start saying, okay, well, how can I leave? And then the saying goes, then you start leaving by car. So then you start leaving to the neighboring countries, to the Colombias of the world, to the Brazils of the world. But then you start leaving, then all those countries get shut down.
Right.
So then you have to start leaving by foot. And that's when you get to El Darien. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the thousands of people that have died trying to cross the Darien jungle from Venezuela over to Panama, because it's the only way to walk over to the US. And people are literally dying by the thousands trying to cross to leave Venezuela to get to the US. It's no different than people trying to risk their lives on a boat to sail from Cuba to the US.
And Mexico. And it's just deadly passages. I don't think we could talk about Venezuela and cryptocurrency and not talk about the Petro. Was the Petro the first CBDC? Like, what was the view about the Petro from Venezuela? Was it just like kind of like another propaganda mechanism for those that actually live in the country? It doesn't seem like it picked up much steam other than maybe the government's using it. What was your thought? Were you there when the Petro was unveiled, and what was your thought about it?
So I was already here in Canada, but I was going back and forth still a lot. To me, and I've written about this, I wrote a piece that I'm going to give away my views, but it's the piece I wrote is called "The Petro is a Scam. Here's Why." I still hold that view. The Petro combined the worst aspects of an ICO with the worst aspects of a CBDC. So it was an attempt for the Venezuelan government to try to dupe the world population to trade their Bitcoin and their valuable Bitcoin and stable coins for their smoke and mirrors, which is when you read the actual Petro papers, it says that the government of Venezuela, nonetheless, guarantees that each Petro will be backed by, quote, a barrel of oil, this many grams of gold. But here's where it gets interesting. Or, quote, whatever the Venezuelan government deems appropriate. So if you're familiar with who these people are, you can't put a cent of legitimacy on this thing, right? And so what they were trying to do was get people from all over the world to trade Bitcoin, like basically to fund them.
Yeah.
Right. To fund their project and to circumvent sanctions, because at the time they were sanctioned to the teeth. And so they couldn't get any funding. And so they were basically trying to get funding, and they were seeing all these ICOs raise money left, right, and center. And they're like, oh, yeah, why don't we say to the world that there's going to be some oil here backing this? And yeah, let's go out and try to see who bites. That was really it. But then it had a second. Actually, it had three prongs. It was an ICO, it was an attempt at a CBDC, and it was a propaganda mechanism to go after miners locally. And so back to the piece around the CBDC, and this connects to the miners as well. The Petro was never intended to be a public blockchain. There was no mining going on for the Petro. You couldn't mine this. It was a completely centralized database. Yet, in the Petro promotional events that they held, all they were showing was mining machines. And so they were basically touring everybody and educating them around what an ASIC was and what a GPU rig was. And basically, between the lines, these conventions or presentations were like, this is an S5. It produces roughly $300 to $400 per month. This is the sound that it makes. This is the heat profile that it makes. This is how you could potentially find it with a heat sensor. This is how you could potentially find it with a tearing sensor. This is how you could potentially find it by measuring the electricity loads. Lo and behold, within 4 days or 5 days of these promotional campaigns, my miner friends and ourselves started getting knocks on the door from these random people who were dressed as utility workers or, local government officials to check the little payment of your last municipal thing. And just to take a read at your power meter. And then shortly after that, everybody's minds start getting raided. Everybody starts trying to get extorted. People start literally coming in and stealing people's equipment. And so that happened to a lot of my friends. Eventually it happened to us. And that is when my family decides to finally leave the country for good. Of course, all of those machines and all of those operations were legal. Every single person that had issues back then had those charges dropped, including us. There was no wrongdoing. With time, obviously 4 years later, it was found that there was nothing illegal about what we did. But it was an attempt at extorting people. And there's a bigger background to that, which is that the Venezuelan government needs to give handouts to its cronies. Right. And every year it did this in a different way. And when it came, the Christmas of 2017 came, there was no other company or industry in the country that had imported a significant amount of assets that you could go raid. But when they were looking at the import records, they saw this thing called Bitmain. And they saw a lot of people brought things by Bitmain. And then when they connected the dots, they're like, we're going to go find these things.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think this is funny because this is what led you it feels like the ethos behind where you are now in co-founding Ledn, where now you're using crypto to help people instead of what you've seen probably the majority of your early days in crypto, which is where it's been used to save people and where, the government intervention was a lot more and a lot harsher. You come to Canada. Tell us a little bit about Ledn. What kind of drove you to build this product and these services for Canadians?
Yes. So the first one I will say is early on, I knew that I wanted to spend as long as I could possible the rest of my life in Bitcoin. To have the biggest impact in Bitcoin or in any business, that wasn't going to happen out of Venezuela. Just because it was going to be very difficult to get funding. It was very difficult to get anybody to believe that we could do something with so much against us. You have the entire system against you. It is a very difficult place to build a business, especially a world-class business. And so I knew it couldn't be in Venezuela. So the first thing was leaving Venezuela again and deciding to do it not where my family was, not where power was free. That wasn't going to be my solution. I needed to figure out something else to contribute. And it had to be more than connecting a machine into a wall, because I didn't make the machine. And the person selling me the power wasn't me either. So I was basically bound to get squeezed eventually. But it was what I knew what to do. So I wanted to keep mining. So I set up my rigs in Canada. I set up a small mining facility in Canada. And I convinced Adam, a business partner today and best friend from university, he had been financing renewable energy for 10 years. And when I came to Canada, I said, I need cheap power. And he says, what do you need cheap power for? And so I said, I'm mining Bitcoin. It's like, tell me more. And so we start talking about mining Bitcoin. And then at the early days, we were trying to figure out a way of institutionalizing mining in Canada. And so we were talking to the really big Hydro-Quebec and big real estate owners, and we were very close. Through that process, a couple of things happened, interestingly. We were helping a lot of miners. Nobody wanted to sell their Bitcoin. Everybody wanted to grow their mine, including us. And so in that process, we said, we don't want to sell the Bitcoin to grow the mine. We should be able to get a loan backed by the Bitcoin so that we can buy more equipment and keep the upside. Brilliant. It's a no-brainer. Everybody should be willing to lend us money on this premise. The first group we went to, Bitcoin's not an asset. What are you talking about? Bitcoin's not an asset. Who's going to do that? Second guy, why would anyone do that? Third guy, it's not an asset. Fourth group, not an asset. And at that point, we looked at each other. He had been financing renewable energy for 10 years. I had been dealing in Bitcoin at the time for now 3 to 4 years. And so we looked at each other and we said, no, these guys are so short-sighted. If we solve this problem, we're going to do great. If we can actually figure this out. And why did we need to do that? Well, we put our heads together. So why do you need to run a lending operation? Well, you need to keep the Bitcoin safe. We need a custodian. Great. Well, what else do you need? Well, you need to be able to trade out of the Bitcoin if the Bitcoin price goes down and we don't get more collateral. Okay, so we need to connect to an exchange. And so then, we need to build a tech platform so that people can give us their instructions. And so then we put the pillars together, raised a little bit of money, and Ledn was created in August 2018. And in December 2018, we issued Canada's first Bitcoin-backed loan. And that, to me, is one of the things that fills me the most with pride, to say that we were the first people to do something so meaningful for this country. And to me, it was a big moment. And that was a very simple premise. We believed, very basic thought, if Bitcoin is to become a reserve asset, you're going to need to borrow against it. There is no other reserve asset that you do not borrow against. You borrow against a phone to buy it in installments. Why could you borrow against a Bitcoin? And so it just made absolute sense for us. And the general thesis of Ledn is we are transparent, we are simple, and we solve a tangible problem that you have today. It's not some abstract use case in some blockchain in the cloud where you're going to hop to 4 abstract things. You got a bill, you need to pay it, or you find an opportunity to invest. You look at your portfolio, you have your Bitcoin, but you don't want to sell it, but you don't want to miss this opportunity.
And it seems like there's a huge market share for that. I don't know what the stats are exactly, but I think, over the last bear market, 70% of people have not sold or moved their Bitcoin around. And it's probably because of services like yours. It's like, I want to keep the upside of it. I believe in it, but I also need money to finance other operations, other businesses, my day-to-day life. But as a compliance professional with my background, what are still the regulatory challenges? What were the hurdles, especially in Canada, securing banking relationships and partners? Give us, maybe a wide scope of the overview of how challenging it was to be the first to issue these crypto-backed loans.
Yeah. So there was a lot of legal work, a lot of lawyers, a lot of consultations. The first thing was obviously making sure that the product was compliant and that we were able to offer it with no issues. So that took a bit of work and discovery, I call it, with our legal team to basically draft and put together an agreement that had the right thresholds. We also had to model what those thresholds would be. At what point would we ask people to come with more collateral? So we'd have to talk to a bunch of clients and say, what would be a great experience for you? And so there was the iteration around the product structure. Then there was the iteration around, okay, can we legally offer the product? Great. Then you have to say, okay, how do I comply with the series of regulators that may be overseeing this? So then you go into, okay, well, I need to comply with FinTrack. So you set up an account with FinTrack, the equivalent of FinCEN. And FinTrack you need to have an AML program to follow. And so, you need to hire an AML consultant to do the AML program. So the basic steps are, do you have the legal infrastructure to offer this, right? Do you have the capital to lend once you get a demand for a loan? Because then we have to go out and raise the money to lend, right? Then, of course, do you have the right team? Because as this thing grows, you're going to need to have operations, client success. You need to have a marketing team. You can think about the marketing can come after, but the sort of basic operations that you're going to need, you have to tick those boxes. I remember the first interactions that you have with, say, an investor or a regulator, and you're telling them what you want and what you want to do or your plan. And at the beginning, people were, because it was less known, on the investor side, it required a lot more explanation, because there was a lot more unknowns on that front. On the FinTrack side of the house and all those other things, they didn't really, crypto wasn't really in anybody's radar. So it was actually easier, I would say, to do certain things. It was now, fast forward, now there's a lot less explanation that you have to do to investors. Everybody gets it now. It's sort of like they understand it. And regulators do too. So now there's more scrutiny around anything from a regulatory side, but there's less effort around investors, if that makes sense.
Now, talk to me about the banking partners, because I think if you live in Canada, North America, we all know the banks are really the de facto regulator, because the regulators can put in the requirements, thresholds, but the banks can make those thresholds and requirements a lot higher because they're the ones absorbing the risk and offering you the bank account, which is much needed in North America. How were they then maybe compared to now? Or was there anything that was like a sticking point where they just couldn't get past, that they really struggled with understanding when it came to crypto-backed assets?
No, I think, what I can say is it's been disappointing, to say the least, to see the actions of Canadian banks towards this industry. I would say that the crypto industry is here despite not having support of local banking, not because of support from local banking. I think it has severely hindered Canada's ability to innovate and to foster entrepreneurship in this industry, and it will continue to do so. It's one of those things that we as Canadians should be embarrassed about, frankly. So I don't have a lot of good things to say, to be honest with you, about the support that the Canadian banks have given to this industry. I would say that for a while, the US filled those shoes, but that was up until that side of the house also became incredibly constrained. And so with all that said, I still think the US is a lot more welcoming in terms of banking to crypto businesses than Canada. And I think if Canada doesn't fix that soon, it will be at a material disadvantage to the rest of the world. as it relates to crypto.
And we see in the US, they just have a lot more options. Europe has like, kind of like bank adjacent services that you can offer, not call yourself an actual bank. Whereas Canada, if you're not getting in with one of the big tiered banks, there's very little options for you to do a significant amount of business. And I think that goes across the board, not just crypto. MSBs will tell you the same thing. Cannabis companies will tell you the exact same thing. Self-employed people will tell you the exact same thing of how hard it is to keep a banking relationship as a business owner, and much less someone using those business services. 2 years ago, trying to buy an NFT and transferring funds using my Scotia credit card, they weren't too lenient, let's just say, on how quickly they'll freeze up those credit cards until you provide them an explanation of buying $500 worth of NFTs. So definitely a challenging market, definitely some hindrances. And I think you're right. I think, people are banging down the doors of open banking and open banking protocols in Canada. We need to get there soon. Otherwise, a lot of these businesses won't be here very long. And to that point, maybe talk about Ledn's exposure now and moving their headquarters to Grand Cayman or Cayman Islands, and your exposure around the world where you still have services here in Canada. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, happy to. So obviously, with everything that's happened in 2022, mostly 2022, 2023 has been a year of rebuilding. But with everything that happened in 2022, transparency, accountability, and regulation are top of mind for clients, and they should be also for businesses. And it has been for Ledn. So at Ledn, we have always taken a lot of pride in our regulatory posture and our transparency and accountability. And a testament to that was the fact that earlier this year, we received approval from CIMA, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, to register as a virtual asset service provider. And this is, I believe, the first license that the CIMA has ever granted to a lender. And it is something that we are incredibly proud of. And because we received this license, this regulatory framework that also allows us to operate and service our global clients, we basically moved Ledn's global headquarters from Canada to the Cayman Islands. And so right now, when you interact with Ledn, you're interacting with our new entity, Ledn Cayman CISA, which is a regulated entity under CIMA. This is something that we have been working on for 18 months leading up to the decision. It's been excellent working with CIMA. They have been incredibly diligent, and I am very excited about the future of regulation around this industry. And I think that not surprisingly, it has been the countries that are hungry for this industry that have moved faster than others to attract this type of business, because they see this as something that has an immense amount of potential. And they, a lot of jurisdictions are looking to become or want to become the New York of crypto, if you would. And so, when Ledn made its announcement that we received our Cayman VAST, it was funny because during that same week, Gemini announced its entity in Singapore and Coinbase announced its entity in BVI, or I think I might have gotten those two switched over. But basically, for most companies at scale, it makes a lot of sense to set up a headquarter where there is a clear regulatory framework and where you are welcome and almost incentivized to operate globally out of there.
And it makes sense because those countries are focused. A lot of their income comes from servicing global institutions, global organizations, and global banks. So they have to be a little bit more welcoming. Whereas Canada is like, well, we're focused on Canadians. We don't have to worry about opening up our arms or opening up, our regulatory system to other parts of the world, where those countries are definitely focused about servicing globally customers. And, I think a big part, and you mentioned globally, a big part of, I believe, the ethos when it comes to Ledn is financial inclusion. I actually just got off a recording with Brett King, a futurist, big in the fintech world. And we talked about, are we reducing the numbers in financial inclusion? He was saying up to 20% of Americans are still underbanked or unbanked. When you think about places like Africa and around the world, that number probably rises, even with technology and things like M-Pesa. What are your thoughts? What do we need? And what his point was is that it doesn't matter the access to these technologies and the platforms. KYC are still going to, digital identities, our identification is always going to be a hurdle for a lot of these people. And that's why the number's not being reduced. What are your thoughts about financial inclusion and what Ledn can do and other countries can do to help lower maybe some of the burden on users and customers?
I mean, I have a bit of a different view in that I do believe that the work that Bitcoin is doing, and frankly, a lot of the work that Ledn does, is financial inclusion in action today. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have many clients at Ledn that have written to us saying that we are the first loan they've ever been approved for. So these are clients in remote places of Latin America. We can get a loan in a remote part of a country like Colombia funded in less than 24 hours. Sometimes people in these towns don't even have a local bank branch to go to. A lot of times these local banks don't even have online banking infrastructure. And maybe they do. But if you were Latino like I am, and your family has lost all of their savings once or twice before because some bank went under, or the government called your bank and said free withdrawals are frozen, which happens often. It's like the World Cup. I say it's like the World Cup. It happens every 4 years in Venezuela. We don't trust local banks. It doesn't matter what you tell me. Even if you're across the street from my house, I do not trust you to hold my dollars. And I will certainly not trust you to hold my Bitcoin. There can be technology, there can be infrastructure, but there is no trust. Now, that's the sort of level one of banking. So when people talk about banking the unbanked, just because you have a bank account in Venezuela, you're not connected to the world. You're connected to some intra network that is useless because nobody can send in and out of things in and out of. So there's this tendency to say that a bank account is this ubiquitous thing that, oh, everybody has a bank, your bank now. It's not a bank. The person with a government bank account, a government bank account in Venezuela is not banked. They're not banked in the way a person with a JP Morgan account is. That's not the same. First of all, I would challenge this definition of banked. Like, what is banked? In today's day and age, I think banked is having a self-custodial wallet, like and access to a service like Ledn. And yes, that's going to require KYC to interact with Ledn. But there are alternatives where you can go with no KYC, but that requires a lot more technical knowledge, et cetera, right? So yes, I think we're making a dent in banking the unbanked, a massive dent on banking the unbanked, right? There's several challenges with banking the unbanked. And I think one is education. Okay. Like the number one will be education, because even though we're going to be here telling you come bank, or Ledn will help you get a loan. Ledn will help you earn interest. Ledn will help you keep your assets safe. We'll be doing that. But don't forget, there's a massive propaganda machine locally from the government banging the opposite drum, right? And so it's a battle, and it's a battle that is, the battleground for it is education, right? And the battleground for it is people's testing and people's experience. Because once people in Venezuela found Bitcoin and they transacted in it and they used it, they wouldn't listen to anybody that tells you it's bad. Like, you're just like, it's like me when somebody says, "No, Bitcoin's dead." I'm like, like an actual laugh emanates from my body. Right, because it's like, it's so ridiculous.
And I think you make a great point about the banking. I think people in Nigeria would agree with you. Having a bank account doesn't mean much if they can't get access to US dollars or pay merchants around the world, or it takes 3 months to get money. And even then, you don't know if it's guaranteed that you can get a certain amount. So I think you raise a great point, is even if we're not reducing the numbers, being banked isn't exactly, that kind of level that we're trying to reach. And you're talking about Colombia, you're talking about markets where Chainalysis has reported these are emerging grassroots adoption markets for Bitcoin, and for probably all the reasons that you covered. Maybe just talk a little bit about the products and services. I'm just finding out about Ledn. I'm Canadian, so we love Ledn, I think, in Canada. But we're just saying, like, hey, we don't really have Bitcoin, or we have a little bit of Bitcoin. What are some of the services that you offer so people can get an understanding of what range of products and services that you're offering, crypto newbies and existing crypto holders?
Definitely. So at Ledn, it's in our name. Our specialty is lending. And so our flagship product is dollar loans with Bitcoin as collateral. So this is a product that you can use to get dollars or stablecoins sent to you within 24 hours if you need dollars and don't want to sell your Bitcoin. So why do people use these services? Many times it's to divest into a different asset. So they have a stack of Bitcoin, but they found their dream house. So they borrow against their Bitcoin to make their down payment. Or they saved enough Bitcoin and they want to start their own business. They borrow against their Bitcoin to fund that business. Those are the main ones. A lot of people borrow against their Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin. And we have a product for that called B2X. It's our most popular product. So we have two types of loans, which are our standard loans, which means you can use them to get the cash used for whatever you want. But then we have a loan that, you can bring Bitcoin to Ledn. And then with a few clicks, we double that Bitcoin for you with a loan on the back end. right? So that product is called B2X. So those are the two kind of core lending products to borrow against. And then we are also going to be supporting Ethereum-backed loans earlier in 2024. That's the core of the lending product. Then there's also the ability for you to earn interest. So you can deposit either Bitcoin or stable coins, Ledn, USDC, USDT, or even Ethereum to earn interest on that Bitcoin or on those dollars. And that is called our growth accounts. So for our growth accounts, to give you an example, we're paying 8.5% on US dollar stablecoins. So you can come and earn 8.5% on your US dollar stablecoins at Ledn. How we're able to pay that 8.5% is because the loans that we're issuing to the people that don't want to sell that Bitcoin, that are borrowing those dollars, they are paying 12.4%. So that's what allows us to take a spread and pay out the 8.5%. And that's something that I will say is that not all lending platforms operate in the same manner or have the same risk management policies or transparency policies than we do, as 2022 showed us. One of the things that Ledn is incredibly proud of and is one of our differentiators is our proof of reserves. So every 6 months, we have an accountant that comes into Ledn, certified public accountant. They get basically a report of all the balances that we owe to our clients. And they also get to see the balances we have in custody, exchanges, lending agreements, etc. And they make sure that we have enough assets to cover our liabilities.
And I think that transparency is important, showing people kind of breaking it down, because people saw high yield, people saw high returns, whether it was, algorithmic stable coins, whether it was, FTX, which were, 3AC, where we were trying to move ahead of, I think, transparency and, the knowledge of what is happening with the Bitcoin, what you're doing. That, B2X product sounds like a winner. Borrowing Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin just seems like something hodlers would do. And during a market like we've had in the last 18 months, it seems like it would probably be flying off the shelves. What are your thoughts? And I know we only have a couple minutes left, but what are your thoughts about the future of crypto? More importantly, like real world assets. You're in, kind of a digital asset class right now. What are your thoughts about real world asset tokenization, putting things like bonds and real estate? Is this going to be something that you offer in the future? Is this something that you're seeing your customers are demanding? What are your thoughts on kind of this real world asset tokenization that's happening and that's gotten the industry extremely excited about over the last 12 months?
Love that topic. Before I touch on that, I forgot to mention one last product, which is our dual cryptocurrency nodes, which is a product that effectively lets you earn interest also on your Bitcoin and USDC. But this is done not by lending, but by you deciding to potentially sell your Bitcoin at a predefined price on a predefined day, and similar to buy Bitcoin. So this product lets you sell Bitcoin at a higher price than it is today, or potentially buy Bitcoin at a lower price than it is today. And you get interest depending on the outcomes. You can read more. It's a bit of a complex product to explain in a soundbite, but you could check it out. It's people love it. So I do too. But to your point about real world assets, I do think that this is going to be a big thing in the coming years. An example of this at Ledn is this idea of our Bitcoin mortgage product. So this is a product, we already have a product that takes a digital asset and a physical asset and combines them as collateral. It's called the Bitcoin mortgage. So we actually pioneered this. We announced the world's first Bitcoin mortgage back in December 2021. And that product's live in Ontario. We've issued mortgage, which is a pretty exciting thing to say. But I think this is the beginning of a trend. So I foresee lending against a blend of Bitcoin and real estate as a very big opportunity, something that we're already working on. This may also expand to, say, borrowing against a tokenized bond or borrowing against tokenized gold, these types of systems. I think you're going to have to still figure out a few things on the custody side of the house and the operational side of the house and also the regulatory side of the house. And the other thing I will say is that this real world asset phenomenon can only be driven by centralized providers. Why? Because no real decentralized protocol can go to a registry to confirm ownership of something. It just doesn't work that way if you're truly decentralized, right? And so I believe that it is going to be the centralized offerers that are going to take the baton here and have to build this out to what it can be.
I love that. And I think it makes sense. And I think, what are your thoughts about NFTs? Could people then get loans against their NFTs, or is that market maybe a little too unstable to provide that kind of assurance for customers?
I think, will that come eventually? I still think right now the liquidity is still people are still trying to sort out the liquidity. You saw some of those projects come out last cycle.
Yeah.
I don't think they're around right now.
No.
Because of the same reasons. And so, yeah, it's always exciting as a founder to look at the upside. At Ledn, we've always looked down first and then up, right? And so first, it's like, how do we absolutely make sure we can protect people's capital?
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that there is, that we've managed through every edge case and that we have the liquidity? We have been through the darkest hours in Bitcoin. And we've been able to sell whatever we need to sell, and it's gone through liquid, and it's been tested, and it's as battle tested as it can be. NFTs failed their first test last cycle, and so will they pass the next one? Probably, and
I don't
eventually
know why.
they will.
A camel with a top hat smoking a cigar seemed like a great investment to a lot of people, right? I know we have 2 minutes left. Talk to me. I know I've been following you on Twitter or X, and you've been watching closely, and I guess for all the reasons you talked about in this episode. The Argentinian election. They just announced a president, I believe it's called there in Argentina, that is pro-Bitcoin, pro getting rid of the central banks. If you had to wrap up your thoughts in 2 minutes, why is this important for South and Central America and around the world?
Very good point, and something that is going to be very hard for me to say in 2 minutes because I have too much to say. But Javier Milei was elected president on Sunday. Javier Milei is a pro-Bitcoin candidate. He is not pro-Bitcoin in the way many people think he is. He's not going to come out and make Bitcoin legal tender like Bukele did. That is actually not his plan. His plan is to eliminate the peso, shut down the Argentinian central bank, and eliminate legal tender laws altogether, meaning that you and me are going to be able to transact and set up a contract in any asset we want. And the quote from their congresswoman most recently said, if anybody wants to make a legal agreement in Bitcoin, they should be able to do so, and they will be able to do so. So you're going to be able to legally transact in Bitcoin and anything else for that matter. Stable coins, like anything, everything will be legal tender. From stable coins to Bitcoin to dollars to euros, you'll be able to choose what you want to use.
What are your thoughts? Is this going to happen, or is this, folklore? Does this help him win the race, but dies out in 4 years when he has to actually implement it?
No, I think he implements it. It's been done before. It's been done by Ecuador. It's been done by El Salvador, both with good examples, both curbed down inflation from the hundreds to the low twos within years of doing this. I've written amply about this. You can check out our blog. And I've broken down both examples and what happened in each case. I do think that he's going to go through with it. I do think that this is going to be great for Argentina. And I think that this is going to be a lot more relevant than El Salvador for many reasons, not a small one being that Argentina is the 24th largest economy in the world. It's a member of the G20. It is the FIFA World Cup soccer champion, and their top star is literally rewriting soccer history in the US. The level of influence that they have, both culturally, politically, and economically, are going to make this a much louder bang, I think, that people expect.
And I think that's a great place to end off this conversation. And you're right. It's not just about finances. It's still about cultural relevance. It's still about influence. Mauricio, thank you so much for this conversation. I can't wait to have you back on the show, maybe post 1 year and see and catch up and talk about all the things that we've discussed and do a little bit of a recap and see where we are.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm actually working on my 2024 predictions, so we can go through those sometime next year.
We'll talk soon.
Cheers.